Oh, we're live. Hey, this is Jose Galison on No Way Jose on the Liberty Movement YouTube channel. Today, my guest is Keith Knight of Don't Tread on Anyone. Keith, I'm a longtime fan of Keith's. I'm really happy to have him on. I was introduced to him from Dave Smith, and then kind of went to all of his stuff at that point. Kind of took a deep dive just because I love his stuff. Especially, I highly recommend the book reviews. I really, really dig those. I mean, it kind of worked on two fronts. It was kind of like for me, like if it was a book I already read, it was kind of like gave me a nice little recap. And if it wasn't, it didn't go too deep to where it wasn't worth reading. So, which I guess it's kind of hard to do that with a book. Books are pretty dang long. But hey Keith, you want to introduce yourself to people who living under a rock and don't know you?
Jose, thank you for having me on. I basically run a small show where I try to make videos making the case for voluntarism, libertarianism, anarchocapitalism, non-aggression principle. I try to also make arguments from a historical perspective, moral perspective, and economic perspective. I have a number of interviews with authors that I've read. I do book summaries, and I'll just pick a topic and sort of rant on it every now and then, try to upload once every 3 or 4 days or so. But yeah, you can find me on YouTube, Library, BitChute, or the Libertarian Institute.
Oh yeah, when did that start happening? I noticed that recently you started doing Libertarian Institute. So.
You know what? Scott Horton and I were on the Ernie Hancock show together. He called me afterwards and started putting my stuff on there. It's probably almost 7 or 8 months ago. Time flies.
I love Scott. I mean, I'd love to have him on at some point. But yeah, that's really awesome. I know you've done a ton of episodes with Scott, and I'd love those. Those are honestly probably some of my favorite Scott episodes because you just let him go, and you I don't know, you seem to just let him go forever. You have some pretty dang long Scott Horton episodes. So, I mean, pales in comparisons to Pete's series that he had recently, but I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
You know what? Yeah, the propaganda series. Yeah, Scott is great. I always talk to his assistant and try to get him at the end of his day. This way he doesn't have to rush off and get anywhere else. I know I can just mention 1 or 2 things and Scott's good to go. But that's what the channel's about. Sometimes it's about long, in-depth analyses and getting very technical about Michael Flynn and Benghazi and arming al-Nusra to fight Assad on behalf of Israel, and then other times it's just about the self-ownership principle. So I try to usher in a lot of variety.
Yeah, you got to mix it up. I mean, I love foreign policy, but I mean, sometimes it gets to be a bit much. You get, I don't know, too much going on. Every now and then it's nice to take it back to basics. But yeah. Anyways, today the topic I wanted to cover was genuinely just you. I've noticed that there's not really much about you, and I recently did another episode with another person, the Keith, or not Keith, but Gentleman. He's the urban agorist, and we did an episode on that. And I seem just kind of like that format, and I think I may start trying to do that more with like first time guests. Is just do literally an episode on them because I think there's something to that, and then it's kind of cool. There's a weekend. I mean, for one, I want to cover superficial stuff because kind of like where you're from, stuff like that. But I also kind of want to go into like your journey intellectually. So like So I think there's something to that, and I know like whenever I get a new I start listening to a new podcast or something, you kind of have the desire to get to know the person, and I think it kind of helps kind of color the experience of listening to them to some extent, knowing where they're coming from. So, first question I have. I mean, this is a quick aside. Keith Knight, is that a pseudonym or is that just an awesome name?
That's actually my name.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of if I could prove that. You know what? I was on Ernie Hancock's show a long time ago before I had my own show, and I was Keith. I had no motivation to lie then. So yeah, that is my real name.
Yeah. I mean, I told you before, and I've told everyone before, this is not my real name. I mean, I know people may be shocked, but I'm not Hispanic. Yeah. I don't really feel like going public at this point in time with who I am. Maybe in the future, I don't know. It's kind of nice having the anonymity, but yeah. So let's get into it. First, actually, another question. I want to know, how old are you?
24.
Oh, geez. I was wondering if you're young or not. It's just weird. I mean, it's not that there's anything wrong with being young, but I mean, I'm 29 and I still feel young, but just, I don't know. I guess I always just assumed you were about my age or older. I don't know, because you just read,
Yeah. Yeah,
But yeah, oh, go
if
ahead.
you surround yourself with the right people, you definitely get a lot of knowledge. It's much more about being effective.
Yeah.
You could I know people that are much older than me who've read way more books, watched way more TV, and a lot more about politics, and can't think straight on anything. So I mean, they think like Trump is like the first bad president we've ever had or something. Just like wild stuff. They call you conspiracy theorists when you know cite primary documents or talk about like Operation Ranch Hand. So yeah, really, age, even though it's it is humbling when I get to talk to people who have been writing in the field for 30 or 40 years. I just really try to soak as much information in because I realize that I'm certainly not as old as some of my competitors here.
Yeah, yeah, that is true. I mean, I don't know though. I mean, it is a. I guess it gives you a little bit of a heads up because I know when I was 24, like I was a totally different person. I was more, I'd say I was more like a conservatarian at the time, maybe even more of like a conservative. I was kind of hip to like Ron Paul and stuff, but yeah. I mean, now I'm a full on like anarchist. But yeah. Anyways, so with that, let's get into just let's get into like the superficial stuff, like where you're from, just regale me with your life story.
I'm from Chandler, Arizona. I'll just work it into my political sort of introduction.
Mhm.
I was in Chandler, Arizona, born in Mesa, so I've been in like central Arizona, and I used to drive up to Sedona with my dad to meet, his parents, my grandparents on his side. And Sedona's like a gorgeous place to walk around, but when you're, super young, 10, 11, 12, you don't really appreciate the beauty or don't really care to go on walks and sightsee. So we would just sort of sit in the around the house and we would talk politics more or less. Um, they were really big, I think, John Edwards supporters and then Barack Obama supporters, and they convinced me to support Obama. I was very in on hoping in the hope and the change sort of movement. At the time, I saw the state as a mechanism for, I think, the masses of people to really influence society. Whereas there's a predatory, profit seeking private market, the state is a mechanism we could infiltrate and achieve our desires. In the absence of that, we basically would not be able to live any sort of life worth living. After Obama was elected, I heard some arguments. Well, my grandparents would always say Sean Hannity and Glenn Beck are the two most evil SOBs on the planet. And I go, oh my God, I got to hear these guys. All they do is just talk crazy. And they probably, hate Obama because he's black, because that's the only reason you could hate a guy who's so nice and just wants to help people. And I came across the argument that Obamacare, while there were pros and cons on the economic side, it would actually force people to purchase something against their will. Now, regardless of what you think about whether it's a smart, effective, good thing, short term, long term, to purchase health insurance for yourself, I was specifically intrigued by, should you be forced to purchase this against your will? And I really wrestled with that, and I ended up moving over to the Romney side, which at the time felt like a really big switch, considering everyone was calling me an idiot and a terrible hating of the poor person to do. And it just took me, gosh, probably took me 6 years to take that principle. It's wrong to force someone to do something against their will, so long as they're not initiating aggression, coercive, physical interference with another peaceful person. Took me like 6 years to apply that principle consistently and become an anarcho-capitalist. I was a big Romney supporter, but seeing Ron Paul on the stage was like brilliant. It was so different because you go from talking about the technicalities of a policy and 36%, 39%, and this guy said abolish the minimum wage and abolish the income tax. And the income tax, I don't remember what his argument was on the stage at the time. I know why I'm against it now, but specifically the minimum wage. I had been in sort of the political sphere for a number of years, just listening. Obviously, I was real young, but I never thought that there was any such thing close to an argument against the existence of a minimum wage. Now, when you look at the evidence, it turns out a small fraction of people get the minimum wage, which proves that you don't need a state, or else everyone's going to be paying the bare minimum, because market competition actually bids up prices higher than they otherwise would be in the absence of competition, voluntary funding, being able to leave the job and go elsewhere. So you have that aspect, and then you have the reality that it hurts people with the least amount of skills, the least amount of experience. You have smaller businesses which can't afford to comply. So it's no wonder, and then this is all secondary. H. Lee Scott and Doug McMullen, the two last CEOs of Walmart, have come out in support of the minimum wage. Oh, how generous of them. And then Jeff Bezos came out in favor of it. So, of course, when you see something like that, you're not exactly raging against the machine when you and the media and the Democrats and a lot of Republicans and the big CEOs are all on one side, and all the professors in academia. So there was both the emotional, I want to fight against the bad guys. Okay, that's taken away. And then there was the logical, well, there's no good argument for initiating violence against a peaceful agreement between people. Internships should be legal. So the reason I harp on the minimum wage thing is that was such a red pill moment for me of there's no good arguments against this, not having a minimum wage. And after a few months of researching, I found out there are no good arguments in favor of the minimum wage, because all of them say when A and B are making a peaceful interaction, a peaceful exchange, C, who is not part of it, has a right to initiate aggression against one or both parties to forcibly stop it from happening. I think Tom Woods is, or maybe he's quoting someone else when he goes, what you don't want to do is look at what poor people are choosing to do and then take away the very thing that they're choosing to engage in at the moment, because that's in effect what it does. So that was just a real wake-up moment that, wow, something I really thought was real or that was so solid, so foundational, I ended up being wrong about. So that was part of it. And then the reason I think I left supporting Mitt Romney was hearing the foreign policy disagreements. I always said, Ron Paul has great ideas, but he's weak on foreign policy. He hates America. This one was really gradual because, admiring the American troops for a very organized structure like the military, the brotherhood that the military gives people. This is something that appears to be very solid, very civilization-like, something I would even want to be a part of. I tried getting into the military when I was 16, and I was actually, because I was a conservative at the time, I tried to get in, and they had refused me. Well, because I was 16, I couldn't get my parents' permission. And then what happened, I forget where I was first introduced to the ideas, because I'd heard Ron Paul talk about blowback, but I'd had no clue that before 9/11, there was actually a U.S. response to Iraq invading Kuwait, which involved killing a mass number of military members in the Iraqi army who were slaves, which today is called conscripts. A lot of them were enslaved with this oh so cool Patriot bomb that could murder, tens of thousands in a second or something. So that was the first time where I'd said, well, maybe this isn't something we should really be celebrating. And then I heard about civilian deaths as a causal result of sanctions imposed by, the United Nations, U.S., United Kingdom sort of front that was there. And once you hear about that, it's like, gosh, let's just apply to the government the same standards we'd applied for anyone else. Walmart says I can't shop anywhere until, the local gang lord surrenders. Well, obviously, in that case, you're initiating violence against tons of innocent people because of one dictator who they're already suffering under. So when I just took this logical moral compass and applied it to the state, a compass I pretty much already had that I applied in my everyday life, I became a libertarian. And then the primary documents of Osama bin Laden writing against why he does not like the U.S. in his own words. You don't get the actual idea of, well, they hate us for our freedoms and stuff. Well, there's a lot of countries that are as free as America that they don't exactly hate. And you actually see it's because of the Iraqi sanctions, it's support for Israel, who engaged in the Qana massacre in Lebanon and a United Nations hospital. It's the U.S. bombing in Somalia. It's the U.S. what today atrocities going on in the Saudi U.S. Regime change attempt in Yemen. So opening my eyes to a lot of this also made me a libertarian on the both principled and utilitarian ground, that it's just so terrible. Meanwhile, the troops are over there and at home while they're fighting for our freedoms. We have lockdowns, which are all unconstitutional. Even judges say it, and Gretchen Whitmer still goes along with it. We have mask mandates, which Jeff Tucker, what's he call it? I think he calls it mass asphyxiation. Just great. We have Thanksgiving limits in some states. In the biggest state, Gavin Newsom, we have Andrew Cuomo. These are not like little events. These are like the two of the three biggest states
the Thanksgiving
in America.
Sorry, not to cut you off, but that shit is so wild.
It's so unbelievable that it's like, troops do have to come home from Afghanistan and protect us from these governors. Yeah. But then that therein lies another sort of red pill moment, where if you participate in an action, regardless of other people telling you to do the immoral action, you have more moral culpability, because them saying words and you performing an action, it does not strip you of responsibility. So the troops and the policemen, I think, are the ones who are just as responsible as the governors.
Yeah, that is one that people
these
struggle
orders.
with so much. Like that one. That is one of the last ones that you have full-on ANCAPs that still struggle with that one. And it's just hard for people to, it's a brutal truth because, it's a blurry line with like morality, but it's like the cops and the military, it's immoral. It just straight up is. Military service and being a cop is immoral. It just on its face, it is. And there is like a difference where people like, you can parse out where, it's more immoral once your eyes have been open to it. It's like if you're doing it knowing that it's immoral, then it's a different story. But if you think you're doing a good thing, it's still immoral, but it's like you can kind of have a little bit of sympathy because it's like they don't realize what they're doing is wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be this way, by the way. All we need are people we delegate, security responsibilities to, who don't have any more rights than you or I, but that's what they specialize in. So they have the cars and they have the equipment to go respond to calls. All we have to do is, if Jose Gallison doesn't have the right to do it, then if he gets a job with the local police department, he doesn't gain any more rights than he previously had. Just as I would have the right to stop a rape, stop a murder, stop a kidnapping. It's not like, whoa. Well, who did you work for at the time of this? That's irrelevant. What matters are the moral characteristics. So to those people who still would disagree with me on this point, I certainly will give a large amount of leeway to conscripts. So, for example, the Vietnam War in America. Look, if you're enslaved and you're forced to do things, I would certainly hope you're constantly thinking of how to sabotage the operation, or maybe when you go to Vietnam, you slip through a few copies of Anatomy of the State to, the people in there so they can, intellectually resist Ho Chi Minh, who, by the way, the OSS and the CIA installed so they could have someone to fight against.
You ever watch the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats? You ever watch that movie?
Is that with George Clooney? Yeah.
Oh, it's such I remember it's such a good movie. Only reason I bring it up because at one point they brought up that like the majority of the people in Vietnam, I don't know if it's true or not, but that they would always fire above the head. So they would like intentionally not shoot them, which I always just thought that was kind of a fun point, but yeah, sorry, kind of aside, threw it all off, but
sure. Yeah. That I could see. If 2 weeks from now, I was drafted and sent to go to a place I was not formally familiar with, and I had to like look at someone, load my gun, point it at them and shoot, it's like, oh, that would be rough, man. Of course, in my mind, I think of, fighting the tyranny, but the guy you're shooting at is not, well, okay, it was against Comintern, which was the communist conspiracy to take over the world, which, by the way, was real as day. I mean, this is an actual thing. So if you're not killing Lenin, Stalin, or Khrushchev, you're killing the dupe who buys into their nonsense because he lives in a village and he's heard only 2 opinions in his entire life. So that would be extremely difficult.
You're killing you is what you're killing.
You're really are.
You're killing you in a different area. It's kind of the peak idea of nationalism. You know?
It is, unfortunately. Yeah. I went to a family reunion, and I spoke with a guy who was really, really old. I think he was 100, and he was giving, and he was filling me in on being in the Second World War. He was enslaved to fight it, and while he's talking, he said, I said, "Did you kill anyone?" Which, by the way, why is it rude to ask our employees what they do overseas? That, I guess, is like some terrible thing. Oh, you can't ask them what they do. It's like, no, I'm your boss here, allegedly, according to you. So start telling me what you're doing while you're on the clock for me.
Let me start giving you orders.
Yeah.
Dave Smith does such a great breakdown of that concept of that they are your employee. It's like, go start telling a cop what the fuck to do and see how that works out for you.
If you tell them what to do, you're a terrorist trying to use violence against the state. When they tell you what to do, if they're scared for a nanosecond, well, then they obviously get to shoot you because they just want to get home, as opposed to you. You don't want to go. You don't want to go home. You want to be homeless, obviously. So, okay. So I'm talking to this really old guy, and gosh, if this was in 2018, it was around 2018. Just in your head, do whatever that was to when the U.S. was in an air war against Japan. And he's talking about the one guy that he killed, because I asked him, did you kill anyone? He said, yeah, I killed one fighter pilot. And he can't get 2 words in this sentence before he starts crying. This is PTSD, man. You'd think he'd, 1, be over it by now, according to, tough guy, cool military. And then 2, the Japanese Imperial Army was like a bunch of evil people, according to all the ideas. Of course, absolutely evil aspects, and they actually did think the emperor was a descendant from the sun god. That is not propaganda, black propaganda nonsense. That I hear is actually true. So he's crying. He can't even tell me the story without, tearing up. He goes, I was able to see the whites of the guy's eyes, and I had to pull the trigger or else he was going to pull it on me. And, that poor guy, he could have had children. Why wasn't it me? And all this stuff. And that's the reality of what war is. You think it's, this total achieving justice and sort of thing. When in reality, if you want to achieve justice, you would go to the top, just like as the military's like wanting to go after bin Laden and Soleimani. Well, you'd want to go after, Hideki Tojo and Franco and Mussolini and Hitler. You'd want to go after those guys. But when governments are involved, you end up getting the idiot populaces fighting each other. And I say idiot with a great deal of compassion, because you don't know. I mean, how much history are they aware of? Are they aware of the philosophical foundations of National Socialism, which they want to fight and then make sure we don't embrace at home? That's not what happens. So getting into that sort of in-depth analysis of what the state does, the nature of war, the reality of economic regulation and regulatory capture, something like
I gotta throw him out of the room. He's not okay.
Something like regulatory capture, where you have the Federal Reserve. Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So regulatory capture, when you have something like the Federal Reserve, is probably the best example, where it was written by 6 of the most influential bankers at the time: J.P. Morgan, Davison, Paul Warburg, Frank Vanderlip. And this is according to Frank Vanderlip's own words in the February 1935 edition of the Saturday Evening Post. They literally talk about how they got together and then wrote up what today we know as the Federal Reserve Act, which gave the state a monopoly on the currency and the ability to set the interest rate, which manipulating the interest rate creates malinvestment into industries that otherwise would not get as much money, overvaluing of a good, college tuition or housing, and then a bubble that eventually bursts because of overinvestment into certain areas. So when you really get to the root of the state being the mechanism that tyrants occupy to inflict on the masses something they otherwise couldn't get away with in the free market, you have the other aspect of the voters who statistically, it's not that they know nothing, it's 90% of what they think they know is wrong, which makes it even worse. You have no cleansing mechanism for getting bad people out, whereas in the marketplace, you have people who can choose to spend their money elsewhere. You don't get that with the state. With the state, you get coercion. So coming to this foundational principle is what made me a libertarian. Also the works of Michael Huemer, his book, The Problem of Political Authority. He just says, why is it that 535 people have the right to rule 330 million strangers? Getting to the heart of that disagreement, why some people, a group called the state, has extra rights no other group does. And anything you say, well, government has the right to do X, Y, or Z. Well, if it really is something that's justified, you'd be able to take that and switch out the variable. In other words, then the Koch brothers would have the right to do it, and Amazon would, and I would. You also get Larkin Rose in his book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, saying, if government gets its rights from the people, and I don't have the right to tax or regulate you, how do I delegate to them a right that I don't have? When did I have this right? Oh, you know what? Whatever, I hereby take it back. Because if it's sort of like your financial advisor who you delegate your money to, well, I once called my financial advisor, said, get me my money, and it was back within like 48 hours. That's not going to happen with the state because of this irrational double standard. So yeah, those are the main people. Also, Hans Hermann Hoppe wrote a book called A Theory of Socialism and Capitalism. This is where he actually gets to the definition of the word. So, a lot of people hate the word capitalism or love the word socialism. So long as you're able to define the terms and really understand what you mean, socialism being the institutionalized aggression against private property, capitalism being a social system with the explicit recognition of private property and non-aggressive contractual exchanges between private property owners, then you don't have to get all caught up in the, I'm for the free market, not capitalism. I'm for markets, not capitalism. Well, you can use whatever term you want, and you're still able to make friends, find out who your enemies are, so long as you're able to explain yourself succinctly.
All right, so I have a question. I was thinking about this as you were talking. You came, clearly your path was liberal to libertarian to ANCAP. Mine was conservative to libertarian to ANCAP. And I found, I don't know, I mean, obviously you'll have a chance to tell me if it holds true for you as well. I found the hardest transition for me was from libertarian / minarchist to ANCAP. I mean, I consider myself an agorist, but agorist, ANCAP, whatever, it's kind of generally the same thing. But to some extent, agorist is more just like, I don't know if you've gone down that road yet, but it's more, to some extent, it is kind of an ideology, but it's more just a tactic to an extent. But anyways, I can consider myself an ANCAP and be completely content with that. But point being, I found it like harder to essentially go from minarchism to anarchism than I did from generic status to libertarian. And because it was like, for me, it was almost like from like generic status to libertarian, I kind of was almost like just slow, and it was almost like a letting go of the superstition. I've read the Most Dangerous Superstition as well. It's probably in my top 3 favorite like libertarian books. But yeah, it was almost like a slow like letting go of like, well, no, the state shouldn't do this. No, the state shouldn't do that. But then the hardest one for me was the jump from minarchist to anarchist. And the one that did that for me was Anatomy of the State. Because it kind of like really from borderline like autistic like breakdown of like, this is why it won't fucking work. Like it just won't. And for me, I was, because you always like, in your head as a statist, you're always like, well, maybe if we just did things better and did less of the bad things, you know, like it would all work out. And then, but the anatomy of state kind of broke down. But it's like, well, that's just not going to happen. You can throw that away. My question, I guess, is kind of a two-part, is which was a harder transition for you, and was there some sort of impetus, whether it be a book or whatever, that kind of did that for you?
Yeah, I would probably agree with you that it was harder to go from minarchist to anarchist or voluntarist, just because it's, not as widely known. So the fact that you don't have what's loosely referred to as the social proof of a lot of people I know believe X, so I'm more likely to believe X because, well, a lot of people, there must be something to it. When I didn't know a lot of people, believed in voluntarism, I was like, oh, this is, even if it sounds good, I'm just going to be alone, which is totally irrational. Whether it's, there's a trillion people or zero people doesn't change the reality of science, history, or morality. So yes, that's why it's more difficult to make the final jump. I think there were a number of things that I just didn't have the intellectual tools to use at the time. So whenever I would look at the voluntarist position, let's say voluntarist includes anarchist, anarcho-capitalist, agorist, of course, all these things we agree. The voluntarist position, you could always find a number of shortcomings. The problem with finding these shortcomings is the shortcomings you found applied tenfold to the state, because the state is an organization you can't opt out of, and it doesn't have competitors that you could easily go to. So you might say something like, well, Yaron Brook was on Lex Friedman's show, and he goes, well, there's going to be A and B, these two parties in the voluntary society, and they're going to disagree and then obviously go to war. This is why it can't work. And I go, hold on. Do governments ever go to war? Has that ever hypothetically happened? Okay, so the idea of war might happen. What he's essentially saying is war is more likely to happen, which I don't even think is true. If you have a coercive organization, you have no incentive. Hey, we really got to cut back this month, fellas, because no. And especially when you have access to a printing press. So war is more likely to happen when you have steady funding that you're coercing and people can't voluntarily opt out of you, and they hold you to a different moral standard. If Circle K, is Circle K a widely known place? Do you guys have that? Or is that just in Arizona? It's a gas station.
I've lived all up and down the East Coast, Maine, Tennessee, and Florida. I'm in Florida now. I don't know if there's Circle K in Florida, but I know I've seen them before. But I don't know. Yeah.
If Home Depot did what the state does regularly with the same exact justification as the state uses, we would clearly see them as a bunch of evil crooks. And you know what? Maybe they do have good intentions. You have to fund it voluntarily, and you don't get any double standards. Yeah, we killed a bunch of civilians, and we declassified the information that explains our justification, but in 100 years, we'll declassify it. So then you'll really know that we were telling the truth. You can't have those standards and expect, peace to exist among countries. So that was a number. It's often referred to as, oh gosh, I can't even think of it. I think it's called the fallacy of unobtainable perfection. So when I say you can't have voluntarism because there's greed and there's corruption and there's people who just lie and there's people who are untrustworthy and people are ignorant too. So you can't just have a free market. It's like, well, those are all things that exist, but they also exist under a statist society. Or what if people don't care about kids in the voluntary society? I go, God, that's terrible. But what if people don't care about kids in the statist society? So they take perfect ideal statism and then compare it to realistic voluntarism, when the proper comparison is theoretical voluntarism to theoretical statism, realistic statism to realistic voluntarism. Once you realize every negative criticism they have of the voluntary society applies tenfold to the state because of the moral double standard that the state has. So even if you say, well, we need one final arbiter, you still have no rational justification for why it should be this group called Congress and not this group called Walmart, or this group called the Red Cross, or this group called the Mayo Clinic. Well, why are their laws just and theirs not? This gets us back to the problem of social order, which is I want to do X with a certain thing, you want to do Y with that same thing. If it's just our bodies, I want you to work on my plantation for $1 a day, and you want to read comic books. How do we decide this? Well, the best way to decide who owns who would be to come up with a consistent, rational ethic. Just as in science, we would have to say if objects fall at 1 meter per second, we'd be able to refute that by taking an object and seeing if that was consistent. If we can't consistently apply an ethic, we can't accept it as rationally justifiable. The only morally justifiable ethic would be the self-ownership ethic. People own their own bodies because they directly control it. Only you can indirectly control my body by first directly controlling yours. And then on a utilitarian basis, look, I think you only have one life, and you have the right to pursue your happiness any which way you please and help others achieve their happiness as well. You can do anything so long as you don't initiate coercive physical interference with anyone else. So we both have the principled and the utilitarian justification for why we would need an ethic to decide what goes on in society, and why the anarcho-capitalist self-ownership private property ethic is superior. And then just a final word on anarcho-communism is a contradiction in terms simply because it says anarchism, no rulers, and then communism, which says if A and B want to make a voluntary employment exchange, C has the right to coercively stop them because they think that it's exploitative. Even if it's voluntary, even if both parties know what's going on, they say, well, we're going to forcibly stop that peaceful exchange from occurring. This means they are claiming the right to rule other people. I own both of the bodies of the people in this peaceful exchange. That's why anarcho-communism is completely ruled out as a justified ethic. We don't even have to get into the economics because on principle, it just can't be justified. Of course, it's like it's okay to produce nothing where everyone starves, but it's not okay to build a building and then employ people and produce products and services, because then you might make a profit, and that should be illegal. This is essentially why the commies starve, because production is bad, consumption is good. There's always been consumption. It's production and efficiency and trade and voluntarism, which is new and something that we should recognize as valuable and embrace it.
Just a disclaimer. I don't know where you're at now, but I would say for those listening, whenever you're dealing with an ANCOM, it's probably best to define terms, because a lot of times, a lot of ANCOMs don't take that position. They don't, because I think Noam Chomsky, I don't know if he considers himself an ANCOM or an ANSOC, but he generally doesn't take I've heard that he's been pressed on it before, and he doesn't take the position that violence is justified for property claims. Because if you're at that point where you're like, violence isn't justified for property claims, then okay, whatever. Then just like, cool, you can believe that you're going to go over and do your collective, but as long as you're not fucking with violence, cool. And if you decide to cross that line, then, I mean, me and mine have our guns. So...
Yeah, well, yeah. Chomsky's also a liar. So he supports he supports compulsory education.
Okay.
Under what method of anarchism is that justified? He supports the Federal Reserve not only existing but engaging in quantitative easing. That's not anarchist. He supports gun control. He said it to my face in Phoenix when I tried pressing him when he was with Lawrence Krauss at the Gamage Auditorium. He also supports, of course, taxation. He came out in support of Biden. He was very happy that the government is that the Biden plan allocates $2 trillion to fighting climate change. I go, oh my God, he's going to be so happy when he hears about how they're keeping us safe with many trillions more overseas. Yeah, just because they call it that doesn't mean it actually achieves that.
Admittedly, Chomsky wasn't the best example, but it was the first that came to mind. Because okay. The point is, not all ANCOMs take the position that property is theft, but the actual ANCOM position generally is that property is theft, and therefore violence is justified. At that point, fuck you.
The reason it's important is because you have to be able to push these people to see where they really stand. If they say, well, I'm ideally, so for example, I'm ideally an ANCAP, but there are some things, for example, if a police officer sees one person assaulting another, is it okay if he uses his tax-funded bullets and tax-funded gasoline car to go stop it from happening? In that sense, yes, that's an immediate solution, but we need to recognize it's still immoral, and that needs to be voluntarized and equalized to have the same rights that anyone else has. The ANCOMs, almost all of them, support Bernie Sanders, which is a drastic increase in the amount of state intervention. And the reason they support him is because of free college and his war against the climate. All you have to do is look at the fact that they support all these big government programs, and you can see, well, all right, the anarcho-communism is a charade to justify the fact that they really just believe in a state that does what they want all the time. That they're not going to be, they're not going to be like, hey, Bernie, what you need to do is start voluntarily getting funds to do these great things that you like to do. They're never going to say that. So you have to be able to push these people to really find out where they stand, because they're like almost all frauds.
That's why I'm saying it is best to, I mean, I think this applies to anything in general. It's always good to start off with define your terms, because a lot of times you'll deal with an ANCOM and their definition of ANCOM may not be your definition of ANCOM. And, I mean, if you're dealing with like a professional ANCOM, kind of like and I understand your frustration, because like that humor debate, that humor Friedman debate, it is like they always seem to like the ones who like take it really seriously and like really get embroiled in their philosophy. They always seem to dance around it. And it's like, that if I really, really push you, if I could get you to not give a non-politician answer, you're probably going to tell me that you think violence is justified for property claims. But they always try to be like, oh, well, it's preferable, or they kind of play the politician's game where they dance around the question. And there was a little bit of that in that too. And it's like, I don't know. But there are ones who genuinely, do take the position of, and I kind of like, it's just, oh, that's preferable. And I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. You can live in fairyland. I mean, as long as you aren't trying to friggin' put violence upon me, I don't really care what economic system you think works best, as long as you leave me the hell alone. But
well, even a couple things about that debate. The guy Brent, I know him. He's been on my show, and him and I really get along. I think he's really a good guy. Him and I just disagree. Now, the other guy, well, it's not even important talking about the individuals. But let's just keep it about the ideas.
I was trying to stay vague for that reason.
But if someone believes in positive rights, the only way positive rights can be practiced is if I have a right to a house, and a house only comes into existence as a cause result of people laboring, trading, and engaging in actions that bring the house into existence. Well, I am in effect saying I have a right to the labor of other people. You can't square that circle. You can't say, well, no, we just want to redistribute it. Okay, so on day one, when you've redistributed everything, and then on day two, when there's tons of inequality because people make tons of different decisions in their life, then what? You're going to stop being for coerced redistribution, and then you'll recognize the legitimacy of private property and voluntary exchange. So once you get into negative rights are the only morally justified appreciation, or the only recognized position, rather. And also, they'll say something like, well, the labor theory of value means you have to, the only way value comes into being is from labor, therefore anyone who performs labor actually owns the value. So this means everyone on Social Security, according to them, is just a thief. They, without working, are reaping value. When in reality, you could have a voluntary pension system or an IRA or a Roth IRA, which is you getting money and gaining value without working. And that's totally in line with what we think, because it's a voluntary exchange. It's an investment. It's postponing consumption for the future. You're allocating money over here so they could make it in a business, and then they pay you back through stocks or dividends or anything else. But the labor theory of value doesn't allow for that. That's why they have to fabricate their belief in the labor theory of value and then say, and also welfare. Well, where does that come in? If they're not producing labor, then they get no value and they get no money, or else they're thieves. And they also don't think that investment and marketing and coming up with an idea and being up 12 hours working for no pay, they don't consider that work. the dumbest nonsense you have to buy into to believe that crap. But yeah, so I just wanted to bring that up because anarcho-communism is very different in principle from actual anarchism. It's like saying Jeffrey Epstein child protection. It's so different from what you actually could have. It's a contradiction in terms.
Yeah, I mean, I almost entirely agree. But like I said, it is one of those things you have to define your terms. It's kind of the
Correct.
idea of we were all statists at one point, and we had ideologies that conflict within itself and aren't consistent. And so it's kind of one of those things. It's like you kind of got to operate on their terms and see where they're coming from, because then they're going to go, aha, like you were wrong. So, all right, let's, one question I want, what made you decide you want to start doing what you're doing now with the podcast kind of deal?
So I read The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose and thought that it was such a brilliant book, and there was an audio book online, but you didn't have the individual chapters. So it's like, did you want to listen to this 10-hour thing or nothing at all? So I said, well, what I'm going to do is I'll just make a YouTube channel where all of this can be found chapter by chapter. So you could do 3-minute for, I think it's like 2 minutes to 13 minutes is like the range of the chapter length. So I just made chapter by chapter and uploaded those. And I had like a headset at the time. I just go, this is so valuable that I want the word to get out there. I wasn't even planning on doing a show. And then I was speaking with a guy that I thought was just so brilliant. And I said, hey, can I interview you on my channel? What I said was, could we go over this, and that? And he goes, yeah, well, call me. And I go, well, if I'm already calling him, I might as well record it. And then if I'm recording it, I might as well post it. And I already have this channel with the Larkin Rose videos on it. So let's just do that. And then it sort of like almost became an addiction. Like, the people that you read and you so admire, you finally get to hear and talk to them and record it, and you can watch it again and build timestamps for, what topics were discussed when on the interview. So sort of like chasing that high, I thought was really cool. Yeah. It was just so fun because, I mean, if you were born in like, gosh, even Rothbard's day, it was a miracle that he got in touch with Mises and Hoppe got in touch with him. Anytime before telephones and, ships, most of human history, if you wanted to admire someone or wanted to look at competing ideas, it was hard to find them. And then it was hard to ever communicate with the people who you really admired. So I just really wanted to take advantage of the fact that, the internet exists. It's like, I have no real excuse for not trying to spread the message a little. And then, I get a lot of DMs and emails from people who say that they really like it. And that always keeps me going. So, it was real gradual. I never really planned to have a channel or anything.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely identify with that. This is only episode 7, but it's been fun so far. I mean, I've had a couple fairly big guests, but I mean, nothing too huge. I kind of did start out slow, and I don't know, I've just been having fun, and I don't know, and it's been like I don't know, just kind of watching those view counts go up, and you're like, holy crap, these people like catching what I'm saying, like, and it's like, I don't know, there's something to it.
Dude, like my first 40 videos, so my first 81 videos are the Most Dangerous Superstition sort of chapters, audio chapters, and I think they'd get like 1 or 2 views each, and I go, I'm archiving the great secrets of the universe. Just keep up the discipline. You promised you'd do this. And then, now I will get, 1,000 people watching, and that is so small. But by the way, but compared to what? Compared to before I had a channel, it was me just watching TV in between commercials going, if I don't have the right to do it, a cop doesn't have the right to do it. And then realizing no one's there to hear me say it. Now that's 1,000 more people. That's a lot more than most people have ever had the pleasure to talk to in the past. And even if no one watched, the fact that I get to speak with some of the most brilliant minds like Jason Brennan, Tom Woods, Dave Smith, Robert Murphy, Brian Kaplan, Michael Humer, I'd do it for 0 views. It's so fun sometimes.
That has been fun. There is like some of the conversation is just fun just for in and of itself. I do have to give you commend you for the discipline though, because it would be hard going that long with is anybody listening type thing. But because like we kind of had I mean, I don't know if you're in the Liberty movement, and I'm one of the admins. I don't know if you put those two together, that we started in the Facebook group. So I kind of already had essentially but even then it wasn't like they all just magically gravitated over there. It's still like, I mean, I don't have any videos with more than 300 views. So, well, I have one with 303. So it's not like I started out like right out the door with like boom, but like, I mean, I had a little bit, enough to kind of give me like, okay, people are watching, you know? So I don't know, give me a little bit of come up. But yeah, this seems to be a thing. I don't remember how many they said. Was it like 7 episodes is what they say that what most do or something like that? So it is like kind of like sticking with it, I think. I don't remember. There's some stat of like what most podcasts stop at. So I think there is something to just like plodding through, and eventually you get to a point where you're like, okay, and just building that audience slowly but surely, because it's like that consistency is what keeps people. At least I'd assume. I'm only like 7 episodes deep, so I mean, whatever. I mean, I'm having fun, so who cares? But like, that's all that really matters. But yeah, with that, you want to go ahead and drop your plugs again?
So
for everybody.
Yeah, if people, I know that YouTube is the easiest to subscribe to, but I keep getting hit with either, this content is, needs to be 18 and up on like nonsense videos. Conscious Resistance was just taken down for no reason, no explanation. Molyneux was taken down, 950,000 subscribers. If he can't get them to explain why they took him down on Twitter and YouTube. YouTube first and then Twitter, so he couldn't call out YouTube and get 100,000 retweets. So it's really bad. If you could please subscribe to me on Library, Minds, BitChute, and also check me out on the Libertarian Institute. I make sure to post stuff there, both previous things that I did a long time ago to try to bring back to light and increase them from that 1 view count that they had many, many moons ago. Yeah, Library, BitChute, and Minds. Minds.com is a great Twitter replacement. It's just missing the people. We already have the platform and everything. It's so valuable, I think. Well, the search engine needs some work. But other than that, it's great. BitChute is improving on a daily basis. And Library, I'm really getting into. Because you forget how, great YouTube was maybe 8 or 10 years ago when all your related videos on the side were things like you had to see. And now when I find like a really good video on YouTube, everything in the side is like Conan O'Brien, James Corden, Key and Peele. It's like they're not even related to, the girl's claims she saw McVeigh in club night before. How do you get from that to, carpool karaoke? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, so shit they want you to watch.
it's so dumb. So so going on Library and BitChute and really digging in, it's like seeing tons of videos. I'm like, I forgot that you get sort of that that excitement again of new stuff, new information. I need to go research more, which I totally lost on YouTube more or less. So yeah, that is where you can find me.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and do our plugs. Just if you want to stick around, I'd like to talk to you a little bit after the broadcast just for a second. We over the Liberty Movement, we have the Facebook group. All of this stuff is going to be in the video description. So we got the Facebook group. We're on to MeWe now because Facebook is doing its shit now. So we're trying to branch out, kind of like how he's pointing out with YouTube, is doing much of the same stuff. Luckily, I haven't gotten big on YouTube to where that's an issue yet. But even then, we have a library as well. We started that already. We got our email, thelibertymovementglobal@gmail.com. If you're so inclined, send me an email. Even if it's just so I can have the email. We're trying to put together an email list, and we're trying to get other avenues set together because we built a pretty cool thing with the Liberty Movement, and Facebook has shown itself to be unreliable. Maybe with the election over, they might chill. But even then, this has really shown us there's an impetus to get our shit together and, kind of expand past Facebook. So, send us an email or if you're in the Facebook group or in the MeWe, hit me or any of the other admins up. Send us your email. That way we can add you to the email list because we're trying to hear soon, maybe do like a newsletter or a website. That's just stuff we're working on. We only have like 5 admins. So it's like when we all have jobs. So, give us a little bit of time. yeah, so we got the merch too. You guys see me all the time sipping on my mug. Usually got a little bit of alcohol in there. We also got what I'm wearing right now is oh crap, the thing's in the way. See right here. Here's the Florida chapter one. You can see they kind of took the Florida flag and made it into an ANCAP flag. Derek kind of does a lot of those designs. He's done it for a lot of the chapters. He's kind of our design guy. He's also the one who runs the merch store. So that doesn't necessarily go to the Liberty Movement, but I mean, he kind of took the time to do it. So if that's something you feel so inclined to do, he's also said if it ever starts getting super lucrative, he'll reinvest it back into the Liberty Movement. But I mean, whatever. We're all capitalists here. Make your money. Who cares? If you want some merch, go get it. Yeah, that's all I got. So yeah, like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Yeah, and with that, deuces. It was great having you, Keith. It's like I said, a big fan.
Pleasure, Jose. Take care, brother.
All right, you too. See ya.